You hear a knock at your door. It's calm, it's casual. You're not expecting trouble. Maybe you assume it's a neighbor, a friend, or a family member stopping by. So you walk over, you open the door, and before you even realize what's happening, a police officer shoves their foot into the doorway. Now you can't close the door, you're trapped in the threshold. What happens next could determine whether you stay in control of your home or get pulled into a legal nightmare. This is exactly the kind of situation that ordinary people walk into every day without knowing their rights. They open the door out of habit, out of politeness, out of the simple belief that they have nothing to hide. And then they're stuck. They can't go back inside without the officer coming in with them. They can't step outside without putting themselves in harm's way under a criminal investigation. They're trapped in the middle, and the officer knows it. I want you to understand what's really happening in that moment, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When an officer shoves their foot in your door, they are using a specific tactic designed to prevent you from exercising your constitutional rights. They know that the moment you try to close that door, you are retreating into the safety of your home, the most protected space under the Fourth Amendment. And they also know that if they can block that retreat, they can keep you trapped in a conversation that you never agreed to have. Before we get into what you should do, I need to warn you about another trick that officers often try first. Sometimes they won't shove their foot in your door right away. Instead, they'll try to convince you to step outside. Whatever you do, don't fall for it. The moment you step outside your home, you lose the protection of your threshold. You're now on your porch, in the open, exposed to all the tricks that police use to interpret your body language, your tone, and your words as reasons to detain you, search you, or arrest you. Stay inside. Keep that barrier between you and the officer. If you have a screen door, keep it locked. You can talk through it. You can be respectful. But you don't have to give up the protection of your home. But what if it's already too late? What if you already opened the door and the officer's foot is already wedged in the gap? You need to know exactly what to do next. And to understand that, we need to look at a real case that shows exactly how this plays out. The case is State v. Mland. It's an important case because it reveals all the tricks police try, both on the street and later in the courtroom, to justify shoving their foot in your doorway. Here's what happened. 2 officers responded to an anonymous noise complaint at the home of Brian Mland. When they arrived, they could hear music playing inside, but it wasn't loud. They knocked on the door. Mland opened it, which was his first mistake. He started talking to the officers, and he even admitted that he had been playing music earlier. That was his second mistake. Here's the interesting part. The officers didn't write him a ticket for the noise complaint. Instead, they kept the investigation going. They asked for his ID and proof that he was the homeowner. At that point, Mland started to get nervous. He told them he didn't have his ID and gave them his brother's name instead. He said the homeowner was at a bar and that he was just staying there temporarily. The officers became suspicious, and one of them started moving closer to him. Mland sensed that the situation was turning against him, so he tried to turn around and go back inside his home. He tried to close the door behind him, but before he could get the door shut, the officer shoved her foot into the doorway as a door jamb. Now he couldn't close it. He was trapped. He couldn't go back inside, and the only other option was to step outside onto his porch, which is exactly what he did. Once he was outside, the officers began interrogating him. They got his real identification, ran a background check, and discovered he had an active bench warrant for a failure to appear on a ticket. Then they arrested him and charged him with possession of a suspended driver's license and obstructing police duties. Let me pause here. The obstructing police duty charge is worth paying attention to. This man was simply trying to exercise his constitutional right to retreat into his own home, and he was charged with a crime for it. It's one of those charges that police use far too often to punish people for asserting their rights. Mland fought back. He filed a motion to suppress, arguing that all the evidence obtained against him was the result of an unlawful entry into his home. He argued that the officers didn't have a warrant and they didn't have his consent, and that once they shoved their foot in his doorway, they were trespassing on his property. And here's the legal foundation he was standing on. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that protection is nowhere stronger than in the home. The Supreme Court has ruled that any physical intrusion by law enforcement into a home, no matter how minimal, is considered a search under the Fourth Amendment. In the case of Kylo v. United States, the court said that any physical invasion of the structure of the home by even a fraction of an inch is too much. So what happened in Mland's case? The officers and the prosecutor tried to use a specific legal argument to justify what they did. They claimed that this was a Terry stop, which under certain circumstances can allow officers to detain someone briefly for investigation. But here's the problem with that argument. A Terry stop is meant to be a limited intrusion in a public place. Can officers really conduct a Terry stop at your front door after you've tried to close it? That question went all the way to the appeals court, and the court's ruling is really important for anyone who wants to understand their rights at the front door. The appeals court focused on the fact that prior to Mland trying to close his door, the officers were just having an encounter at the doorstep. They were standing there, knocking and talking, just like any ordinary visitor. And under the Fourth Amendment, a person who is simply having a conversation at the front door is not necessarily being seized or detained. You are free to end that conversation at any time, turn around, go back inside, and shut the door. That's exactly what Mland tried to do. The officers never gave him a reason to believe that his movements were restricted or that he couldn't go back inside. They just knocked. He opened the door. He started talking. Then he changed his mind and tried to end the conversation. That's his right. The state Supreme Court ruled that this police trick using Terry Visa's Ohio to justify shoving a foot in the doorway doesn't work. You can't claim that a Terry stop at the front door gives you permission to block a person from retreating into their home. The court recognized that if you're at your front door and you feel uncomfortable with police questioning, you can turn around, go back inside, and stop the conversation entirely. Now, there was another argument that the police tried to make, and it's one you'll hear officers use all the time. They claim that by sticking their foot in your doorway, they're not actually entering your home. They say they're still standing outside. But the facts in Mland's case were clear. The officer shoved her foot into the doorway, trapping Mland so he couldn't retreat. This wasn't an encounter that took place outside the home. It was an intrusion that crossed the threshold. And the Supreme Court has been very clear about what that threshold means. In Payton v. New York, the court said that the Fourth Amendment protects the individual's privacy in a variety of settings, and in none is the zone of privacy more clearly defined than when bounded by the physical dimensions of an individual's home. The court also said that at the very core of the Fourth Amendment stands the right of a man to retreat into his own home and be free from unreasonable government intrusion. The Fourth Amendment has drawn a firm line at the entrance to the house. Absent exigent circumstances, that threshold may not reasonably be crossed without a warrant. This is really important for you to remember. An officer doesn't have to bring their entire body into your home for it to be an unlawful violation of the Fourth Amendment. Any amount of intrusion, even an inch, is too much. It's an invasion of your privacy, and it's a violation of your constitutional rights. Once Mland decided he wanted to end the conversation and retreat into his home, the moment the officer shoved her foot in his doorway, she was trespassing on his property. That was a Fourth Amendment violation, unless the police had already made it clear that he was being detained and had a legal basis to follow him inside. Simply deciding that they wanted to conduct a Terry stop investigation is not enough. The third trick that police use in this situation is to claim that your front porch is a public place where you lose your right to retreat. They might argue that by opening the door and stepping onto the porch, you voluntarily abandoned your privacy interest in the home. But that's not what the law says. In United States versus Berkowitz, the Supreme Court said that a person does not abandon their privacy interest in their home by opening the door from within to answer a knock. And in the specific situation where police enter a person's home without consent, the person has not forfeited their privacy interest in the home. They have not relinquished their right to close the door on unwanted visitors. Another case that drives this point home is McKenna v. George. The court in that case was very clear. If someone answers the door during a knock and talk and they don't like what's happening on the other side, they can absolutely shut the door, retreat into their home, and the cops can't do anything about it unless they have a valid warrant or exigent circumstances. So what are you legally allowed to do in this situation? You could argue that you have the basis to shut the door on the officer's foot because he is trespassing on your property and you never gave him consent. But here's where the police trick gets dangerous. The officer knows that if you try to shut the door on their foot, they can claim that you did it intentionally to cause them pain, and that can be the basis for them to arrest you for assault and battery on a police officer, which is a felony offense. That's the trap. You have the right to shut the door, but the officer is waiting for you to do it so they can escalate the encounter. In Commonwealth v. Barnes, the court ruled that it was reasonable force for a homeowner to shut the door on an officer's foot. The officer was trying to enter the home unlawfully. The court recognized that the homeowner had the right to protect their privacy, but the key issue was that the court ruled it was an unlawful arrest. However, you also have to be aware of Carter v. Commonwealth. In that case, the court claimed that shutting the door on the officer's foot was actually a legal basis for the officers to detain the person and ultimately arrest her. The difference is the legality of the arrest, so you need to be very careful. How do you stop cops from shoving their foot in your door? The first answer is simple. Don't open the door in the first place. If you do open it, only open it a crack, never fully. If you have a screen door, keep it locked at all times, and never let the officer get between that barrier and the threshold of your home. Pull out your phone and record the entire interaction. Show that you're inside your home and that the officer is on the curtilage of your property. If they try to shove their foot in, you have proof. I also encourage you to have an outdoor camera system trained on your front and back doors. Officers sometimes try to cover your cameras, and if you're not recording, the police report may tell a very different story than what actually happened. If the officer does shove their foot into your threshold, Recognize that you need to continue recording and that they are acting illegally at this point. Let the officer know that you do not consent to them entering your home and that you do not consent to any search of your home. Make it clear that further entry would be considered trespass under the law. Then exercise your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and do not answer any of their questions. If you have to say another word, it should only be to your attorney. By following these steps, you activate your constitutional rights and protect yourself under the Fourth Amendment. The officers will realize that everything they're doing is being recorded for accountability. Remember, it's always the officer's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they had a legal basis to enter your home. By recording everything and following these steps, you put yourself in the best position to prove that your rights were violated and to make sure any evidence they try to use against you gets thrown out in court. But the best thing you can do is not answer the door in the first place. If you have a security camera trained on your front door, you'll know it's a police officer doing a knock and talk. You can kick back, relax, and ignore the entire situation. You don't have to answer the door at all. If you didn't call the police and you don't have any business with them, why would you open the door if you don't want them there? It's your home, it's your castle, and you have the right to keep it closed. Now we've covered exactly what you can do to stop cops from shoving their foot in your front door. But what if they stay outside on your front porch, keep banging, and refuse to leave? How do you stop them then? That's a whole different situation, and I'll show you exactly what to do when police refuse to leave your front porch in the next video.